Good morning, crusty crew.
Good morning.
The shared good mornings feel very summer campy, where it's like, good morning, counselor. Ugh. I just got back from a run, so I'm very red, and also my hair's soaking wet. So just prepare yourself for that type of meeting. Since Stephen doesn't have a lot of time, Troy, do you want to start talking? Because I don't even know, I haven't heard from Brian. Troy, do you want to start talking about your idea? Oh, look, there's Brian. Okay.
You said his name too many times.
In the mirror with the lights off. Yeah, so do you guys want to start talking about issue 63 while Stephen's still here? And then I'll start taking notes on it.
Yeah, I was gonna let them express or what was already discussed, because I want to get a little bit of an understanding before I present the idea that they around this situation that we're trying to resolve, the installation outputs. So I saw, and forgive me for not understanding a lot of the context around the decisions that were made around how we want to implement this, but just trying to understand a little bit better around why we want to service, and is the service going to then create the CRD, and is the CRD going to then be a fetchable thing from kubectl, and are we trying to have that like shipped with the operator? Just a little bit of context around that before I ask some questions in that design.
Did you want to take some of that, Brian, or do you want me to start on that?
If you want to start, I'm still recovering from vacation, getting my head into space. So
No
sorry.
worries. So, I mean, really, this all came out about from us trying to run the Porter operator at scale and install or manage installations for developers across our organization. And then we realized that, okay, we can easily create installations via APIs and via automation, but getting useful information out of that installation is not that easy to do with the operator in the current state. So we create a database, we need a connection string, we need to take that connection string and share it back to the developers. There's no easy way to consume installation outputs from the operator the way it stands now. What we were doing is we were running an agent action inside of a pod, just as a standalone job that did a Porter installation outputs list -I installation name, blah, 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 send to JSON. And then we were parsing the kube logs, the actual Kubernetes log file. We were just parsing that out and extracting from the raw text what those outputs are. But we were wanting a native way to actually interact with the installations that are installed by an operator and get things like outputs out of it. And so we talked about how do we do this with potentially a installation output CRD. There were some issues that we ran into, and maybe Brian, you can speak to this a little bit more because you were a little bit deeper into that code, but it had to do with dynamically updating fields on the CRD. I don't remember what specifically. There was an issue where we couldn't easily do things with just a native output CRD. And so we went with the gRPC server to expose this, because this is something that had already been requested as well. And Carolyn was like, well, this is kind of two birds with one stone. We've had requests for a gRPC server to start exposing some of this stuff. And this will allow us to get access into the operator's managed installations.
Yeah. And if I recall, it wasn't all like a technical issue. It was, we didn't want an output CRD to be a required part of it. We talked about it being an optional thing. There's a whole use case around the accounts, the RBAC, whatever that's performing the deployment or the installation isn't necessarily going to be the one that has permissions to view the outputs of it. So we wanted to make sure we're thinking about accommodating different RBAC for looking at the outputs of a installation versus actually running it. And yeah, and like, I guess the quick and dirty solution was to put outputs into a CRD, but that didn't address the sensitive nature of what we can run into with outputs. So then it becomes, okay, do we put them in a Kubernetes secret store and go Kubernetes native for secrets and its ability to work with external key stores like Azure, Key Vault, HashiCorp Vault, et cetera? Or, do we look into supporting going directly to the source for some of those key stores? But ultimately, I mean, the big driving use case here is we were creating something in order for us to retire using Terraform Enterprise, and Terraform Enterprise gets you your outputs. So as a service. So we just were looking for something functionally equivalent.
Okay, so I guess my question is because rather than creating the service, you said the CRD was an issue because you have to like run this job to get the outputs to then place into the CRD. So you would rather just have a service that would do that. And so during an installation, and I have to look at the code at least, when you create an installation CR and it gets ran through the operator, and then it's at a finished state, those outputs aren't accessible from the CR itself, or does it need, or like how do we actually get those outputs that we then have to place somewhere to, because I think that what I'm asking, the same lift that's necessary to create the CRD is the same lift that you're gonna have to do that's necessary to do the service. And now you have a dependency on the service.
And we were looking at like having to spin up a whole nother agent action, whole nother job, versus if you're running the Porter gRPC service alongside the operator, then you're able to just at that installation finish state query and then potentially create like a installation output CRD. So it's about giving that direct programmatic access to Porter instead of having to run additional jobs and pods, et cetera, and taking on the extra overhead of that.
Okay, so with Porter, the CLI then acts the outputs, which would then go to the operator, which would then
it would be the operator doing a gRPC call to the service that's running the Porter gRPC service that's running alongside the operator. And we had to address a specific issue in how the operator could be deployed before being able to use that model. And that's where we went in and kind of reduced the footprint of configuration such that you could only have one Porter configuration per namespace in Kubernetes. And that allowed it so that you could say, okay, when I'm running this namespace, here's my gRPC service to query. If I'm in a different namespace, I'd be a different, and I'm thinking off the top of my head a little bit of whether or not we need to support. Well, no, I think the gRPC call stuff is all namespace, so it shouldn't be an issue. But potentially each gRPC, sorry, no, it does make sense. For each gRPC server that's running can potentially have a different Porter config for the Kubernetes namespace that you're working in, which means that Porter config can go to totally different data store for installation data versus in namespace A versus namespace B. So, and that was a simplification of how it used to run, where you could literally have a Porter config per installation that you'd have to figure out and resolve down to a data store on the back end. So now that we have that in place, it's a lot cleaner to run the gRPC service. It's just another component of the operator.
Okay, so what I was interested in, because I was trying to take the service away because we still have to create a CRD. It sounds like for the outputs to be available for like as a resource itself. I wouldn't have the CR have a controller with it, so like it would only be like a basically a store of the outputs that come with that installation as a reference situation. But I'm still interested.
You'd have to have all of Porter in the operator for that
No, and that's what I'm,
the issue.
right, and I don't want to,
Yeah.
that's why I was like,
Yeah.
I really don't want us even running a job to do the porter situation, and I'm trying to really figure out a way to extract the outputs to then fetch them into a CRD without having to do the porter thing.
Yeah.
Where is the outputs hidden when you do an installation, when you create installation through the porter operator? Is it just
It all
because
ends up
that,
in the data store for Porter.
and that's through Mongo, right?
It can be, yeah. By
Okay, so
default, it is.
Mongo
default-
and the secret store, depending on if it's a sensitive or not.
Yeah,
okay,
and that again is configurable by plugins.
and okay, so I think yeah, so maybe what I'm saying isn't going to work, because if that's if we already have a plugin model for that, what I'm saying would break that situation, and then it would not allow any of that to take place unless we just still use that model, but then allow I think what I'm trying to do is not necessarily get rid of the gRPC server, because I think it's still valuable from what Carolyn was saying, like we can add more endpoints to it later and do something else with it. But I'm trying to, because we have to create an installation CRD, right? So that's going to change the API surface. That's going to be a thing. So like you can, from what it sounds like, right? And forgive me if I'm wrong. We query the gRPC server for the for whatever to get the outputs. That's going to then create a CRD, is what a CR, what you're saying, and then that's going to be available to do kubectl get installation outputs, installation name, installation namespace, or whatever like that, and then I can get that. Because that has to be created and it's dependent on the installation resource itself. Programmatically, I think you can still do that within the operator space. It's just the fact of how those outputs get into that situation is the gap I'm trying to define. And I understand that they're programmatically, you could do that with a gRPC server, but the gRPC server still needs to do the lifting of what I'm asking there. Looking at this a little bit, I'm just trying to see like where
the gRPC service is, I kind of think of it as a long running instance of the Porter CLI that you can quickly query on demand, instead of having to go through the whole agent action overhead just to run it. It's you get the efficiencies of just a long-lived service for querying.
Okay, because yeah, we talked about Sarah and I had a meeting yesterday talking about this a little bit, because I was trying to understand a little bit better. We talked about like, because we use Mongo as a store, we can probably still use that, but if it's the secret sensitive data that needs to be in a different store, it's going to be trying hard to fetch all of that stuff together to collaborate to put in that resource.
I would be very careful about fetching anything from the Porter.
Don't go straight to Mongo.
Other than right. Yeah, I would be very careful of that.
Yeah, we need that abstraction layer because the data store is ultimately configurable.
Okay.
And right now we don't have anything between like Mongo and Porter that like kind of abstracts it, right? Like I couldn't just say like, here's an arbitrary value that I know you should store, right?
That's where the intention with the gRPC service is to have that abstraction from whatever, however Porter is configured and what kind of data stores and secret stores it's configured for, and the need to get the information programmatically.
Steven's
okay, so this
thing. That's awesome.
Okay, so regardless, so the gap that I'm seeing is where the gRPC service is taking place. Okay, so that's something that I'm not going to be able to get rid of. Is there any way, because like you said, I don't want to do a job putting Porter in the operator to then do the listing of the outputs. I have to see how that actually works, right? As far as like how the outputs get received into the because I guess what I'm saying is I can create a installation output CR, right? And then have a map of values where we can actually just create a thing in the spec where it's just going to give you the output of the installation resource and not have a status and not be a resource that's going to get triggered by your CR. It would just be kind of like a secret or a config map or something to that degree, right? It's just a standalone thing that can give you the output of this one thing that it refers to. However, I don't want to put it in a place where getting that information is hard, or where you see that information is not relevant to what is actually happening. So for instance, if it's still updating and you look at that thing, it's like, oh, okay, it's these are the outputs, but I should have more. And it's like, is it still working on itself to get the rest of them, or is it finished? and well, maybe that's where the status will come into play, right? Like we can say like
Mhm.
complete
Yeah,
or
and not to mention like the way that gRPC services right now, it's get the latest outputs. You know, if you were actually, you know, looking at CLI capabilities, you can get the history of every output ever produced from an installation,
Mhm.
and like an upgrade or reinstall could also trigger a refresh of that too. So, you know, I think there's some discussion to be had around, does that installation output resource represent the latest at all times, or is it a historical, you know, instance
right, which
per
is like how
output?
you. So now you got to like carry the state within the resource to try to figure out exactly where you are in that stack. Okay. Yeah, it was so much easier yesterday. Maybe I shouldn't have talked to you today. No.
Sorry. Yeah.
But no, in all seriousness, if this is the path we have to go down because of the constraints we're under, I don't see an issue trying to figure out how to implement that, or just as far as like extracting the stuff to make the. So for instance, if I try this at home and I do like a Porter Hello World and it gives me like these outputs, I want to be able to generate the CR that comes with the output CR from that installation to be able to be surfaced by any means, whether that's the programmatically gRPCing to the from the operator to that thing, or allowing ourselves to be able to create. So I need to be able to create those things dynamically, and to create those things dynamically has to be probably the last step before I finish the installation from the operator CR that it came in, right? So basically, this is how the workflow would look like. When you trigger the reconciler for the installation CR, it'll get this installation CR, it'll see if that thing exists, right? It'll see if the installation's outputs exist. If it doesn't, we're going to create it, you know, place it into like whatever state, let it push it to the API server. So at least it says like, we're coming, but it's not here yet, right? So like if you start saying, hey, I want to look at this thing, it ain't finished yet. So we have to wait, right?
Pending outputs.
Pending outputs, right? Or something to that degree, right? So then as it goes on and it's doing the install and stuff like that, right? Like, and the gRP server is here, right? I'm just using this as a benchmark. And then like before it reconciles control result nil, like final, it will then update those by getting it from the gRPC server and updating that status to then say, we're good. And then like, once you get the status of your installation CR that says I'm finished, the outputs would be available to see from the actual finale of the situation. So yeah, I don't think that's unreasonable. I just was trying to understand a design and maybe take the gRPC server away if we could, but because it's the thing that's the gap that's trying to get the outputs is the problem that I'm seeing. And I didn't.
Yeah, I think
I couldn't get that from the actual discussion, and maybe that's what was said and wasn't written down. But this makes it a little bit easier to understand.
Sorry, I keep trying to interrupt.
No, go ahead. So
but I think the guiding principle we were kind of working off of it, which, you know, Carolyn kind of put in place, is like the operator is a wrapper around Porter, and we should keep it to be a thin wrapper as much as possible. So when we need user capabilities for Porter, it's all in the Porter project, not in the operator project. And the adding that gRPC API server to the Porter CLI, that basically allowed us to have a lot more flexibility in how we could use Porter without having to, like you were talking about, like importing, you know, making it so we could import Porter libraries or module into the operator and have that tight coupling. Because also these installations, on a per installation basis, you could be using a different version of Porter even. Right. So we have to accommodate that as well. And you know, all of this kind of helps to keep the focus on that development work in the Porter project versus the operator.
Okay, well, yeah, great. So I guess we just have to, I looked at the agreed upon schema in the actual issue of like what the output CRD will look like. I think getting that started, like outside of the gRPC binding thing that we're going to do, service definition, I can at least, you know, start there to create the new resource, update the CRD, so that's actually deployed, right? And then, so I have a branch now, and I was trying to do that, at least start with the CRD, that, and then like place it in the end where we're gonna like fetch these outputs, and then that could just be a programmatic call from inside the operator to the sidecar or the service of the gRPC service. It's weird because Kubernetes is a service and gRPC is a service. So it's like the service of the service, right? To then get the installation outputs, and we can define that mechanism or how that call is made to then see, make the CR and then push it out once it's finished.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, it feels right that we're doing the heavy lifting and not asking the user or the operator.
Yeah.
The user to do it. Like user should never know anything about this gRPC service.
Right.
They should never be accessing it. But yeah, we have to do a little bit of the heavy lifting there.
Right, because initially I was like, is this going to be surface so they can see it? Because if that's the case, like that we don't need the operator, right? But
right. I mean, that did come up in past discussions, and like one of the things that we were really kind of clear on at the start was the creation of an installation output CRD should be an opt-in behavior and not happen by default for every installation.
Okay.
Because we want users to be in control of that output information, and also we have to kind of, I think, look into a little bit more of some of the access control use cases around it, of who has access to installation status versus who has access to installation outputs, and making sure we're accommodating that. And
because to draw this to be idempotent, right? Like you don't want, say for instance, someone makes an installation, right? And they're like, oh, I want the outputs now. So I'm just gonna like change this annotation tag or whatever, I think whatever mechanism we're using, right? And then all of a sudden it tries to install it again, right? And then it's like, we already installed it, right? So like, we don't need to do that. We can literally just say, if this thing exists, update the status. If it doesn't, like, don't reinstall it. We can see if it's installed, right? We actually have a CR. So there's like a workflow. I don't want to turn this into a state machine or anything like that. That's to be completely difficult, but there's ways around how we, and I think that's it's mature enough now to where we can just add this stuff and drop it in to make it effective. Okay, so no, that clears up a lot for me. I think working on that can make it a little easier how we're going to do it. It's just I have to dig into how we get the installation outputs. I know how we do that on the command line. I just have to figure out how that we can do that in the operator with the call that we're going to make to gRPC to do that.
And in that Porter Argo demo project that I've been curating, we have all of this working using an Argo workflow that's querying the gRPC service after an installation. If you're interested in just seeing how
absolutely.
We currently have a stopgap in place for that.
No, that's great, because if anybody has a link, you can drop it in Porter.
Yeah, I'll get a link here in a second.
And that'll be great, because I can, like, obviously I'm gonna have to kind of piece it together to put it in an operator, but if I can utilize some of that same technique, that'd be great.
I'm just
At
gonna
least
say,
you can see, it's good to see something else working there.
there's a ton of things I forget when I talk to Troy about this, and I'm like, yeah, I don't remember why we do this. I know there's a reason. And then I come in here and I remember that like the storage backend is supposed to be swappable. And like, I think you even brought that up, but I forgot that we don't have the things that I imagined we have in place. So I want to say I appreciate the like candid discussion. My brain.
Well, yeah, the historical context.
That's the in
amazing.
the trenches view of using it, is what that is. Like we were actually getting this whole system up and running. So we trial by fire to remember all this stuff.
You're like, I have trauma reminded.
Yes.
I'm like, I think we talked about this. We probably have this as a feature. Cool. I had questions. So basically TLDR is, as I'm working on advanced dependencies, the goal, which random ghost people is a good way to say it. And by ghost people, I mean Microsoft wants operator v1.0 by September 30th, which is fine, whatever. It's 5 issues. And it's probably gonna be like, actually it's November. That's how I imagine it going. So I have to pick up work on the operator, which means I'm gonna be asking a lot of questions that are probably pretty dumb and basic. I'm just warning you. So I don't know if you saw in the maintainers my comment about like, I'm trying to add the TTL thing, where it like kills it or prunes it after like X amount of seconds, or that it's like gone. And my question was like, one is, because in the comment, and here I'll post it here, that just so it's like so what I'm referencing, everyone can see what I'm talking about. In the comment, Carolyn points to an issue created in CNAB Go, where she wants owner reference to be in CNAB Go. And my first question was like, why basically? Like, why do we add owner reference, which is in the metadata for the operator, into CNAB Go? Like, is there stuff in CNAB Go that is overarching that will clean up operator resources that I need to care about? And question two was, she says, when it's deleted, we will remove our finalizer and allow it to delete, and then delete parent agent action. So I put up a draft PR where in agent action, I just added the TTL, and that's it. I added one variable. And my question was like, is the finalizer an overarching thing? Like, is the parent agent action like in a different place? Like, what are these things? Like, if you could just explain these like concepts, that'd be really helpful.
Oh, I didn't know if anybody was going to say anything. Well, yeah, finalizers kind of do the thing where you can't delete this until something else gets deleted, right? So it's like a asynchronous action of it will just mark the delete timestamp to not be 0, right? And then so if you look through the code, if we actually start checking that, because we put finalizers on things, so like you can do this stuff. Usually it's used for like owned resources, because like you don't want to delete a secret that's dependent on the thing, right? Because interestingly enough, if you use owns in controller runtime, that gets deleted, that also reconciles the parent object, right? So like if you delete a secret that's dependent on like an installation, for instance, if you delete the secret, the parent object will then get reconciled, and it'll say like, hey, we're reconciling because we deleted this parent thing. I mean, this owned resource that you have, and you have to go through the whole loop again to see what happened, right? So so it exists for those specific reasons. I would have to see the chart of how the hierarchy of these resources are displayed from a position of why it needs to be owner reference in CNAB Go, because I'm not too familiar with CNAB Go in a sense, but I know what controller runtime does with finalizers and stuff. As far as like, I think I told you yesterday with your PR, you're gonna have to like regenerate the CRD if you add anything to the API version V1, right? So that's just a controller generated thing. And then I don't know if there's a sequence, because I have to see what happens when you delete stuff and what sequence is necessary to do those things, and how that's going to contribute to the removing the finalizer to finally be deleted once everything else is done. So
the finalizer is a Kubernetes thing, not just a porter.
Yeah,
okay.
It's a Kubernetes.
I didn't know. Like,
yeah.
Porter finalizer, like trying to figure out what it is. Okay, cool.
Yeah, they're trying to solve the problem of, I deleted this before I deleted this, and now I can't delete this because it depends on this being available for me to delete. So that's the problem we try to solve. It causes a lot of headaches because it's a tag that you literally just put on, and like you can, because it has a finalizer thing, you can make it anything you want to, honestly. So say for instance, if there's like 3, you can have 3 finalizers on one resource object, and if you try to delete the secret that's owned by Porter installation, but it's also like owned by some other ITO thing that puts a finalizer on the secret, that because they both share the same thing, it won't let you delete the secret unless you delete ITO and Porter installation or something to that degree. Like it's a weird mechanism. There's even blog posts about it, like stop putting finalizers on stuff because everybody else does. And yeah, that's the challenge with that. But in regards to the sequencing and things like that, we do it a couple of times in the operator itself to try to get through certain sequences of deletion objects.
Okay, that makes sense. And then I think what I understand about the owner reference thing is that some, like when we are deploying our bundle and like it becomes an installation, like there's one level of dependencies. And so when we put in the owner reference into the Kubernetes driver of CNAB Go, I don't understand these words, so like tell me when I'm just saying bullshit. But when we're doing that, it's just basically allowing for that like child parent objects in, like, I'm going to assume bundles themselves when we deploy them. I can share the issue.
Yeah, sorry, I missed the first part of your question there.
I probably did too. So like we have the Kubernetes driver in cnab.go and we're trying to put owner
Oh, yeah.
reference in it. Okay, what is this like doing? Like what is the Kubernetes driver in cnab.go doing? Is like a good question.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah, that actually, so we're leveraging the CNAB Go driver to be able to run natively in Kubernetes. Like, I mean, I'm not gonna be able to give the best driving motivation for it, but I can tell you, like, I ran into issues where to address getting bundles from private registries and you needed credentials, that led to a path of discovery that it's an issue in the CNAB Go Kubernetes driver and not something directly related to Porter. So we're leveraging a lot of CNAB Go's capabilities to be run in Kubernetes, and unfortunately, their primary focus has been Docker, and so it's not as Kubernetes native as it could be. I remember having to put in like a hacky kind of workaround to use a Docker config file with auth in it instead of being able to use more native Kubernetes native ability to associate image poll secrets or something like that. So yeah, I think it's just the Kubernetes driver for CNAB is a little bit still a little immature in regards to some of that.
I also think it, because I did quite a bit of digging into this at one point, trying to debug some issues. So like, I'm not convinced that how we're using the CNAB Go driver in Porter is correct. It really seems like there's a lot of knowledge that CNAB Go seems to have around Porter that may not be right. So it just seems to be a dependency. I don't really see how CNAB Go Kubernetes driver runs outside of Porter. And I'll have to look into that, but they really seem to be tightly coupled, and it might need to be broken at some point too, if we want to keep going down that road, because essentially there's an environment variable that you put on when you run Porter that tells it, do I want to use the Docker driver or the Kubernetes driver? And then the difference is when I create a new job, when I do, driver.run or client.run, it changes how that driver behaves depending on what your Porter environment variable is set up as. And it really seems like they're tightly coupled together. And I'm not sure that that's appropriate or not.
In doing dependencies work, I like created like this is what happens when you do Porter build type of like chart, right? I was expecting to run into a lot of cnab.go, and I agree with you that like a lot of that like pack bundle resolution and pulling like the OCI image and like all that stuff, like all of that, like there isn't a lot of like, I don't know, it's hard to tell where the line is what I'm saying. So
and I'm concerned that CNAB Go might be a little bit too Porter aware.
Yeah, I can see that. And especially since we basically took care of cnab.go for a long time.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, we need this fixed. Well, let's just put it in CNAB Go. Well, should we, or should CNAB Go be a pretty lightweight abstraction versus the actual implementation? There's a lot of implementation in CNAB Go that might not supposed to be in there.
Okay.
Well, I think there was a little bit of a history there of trying to use the use cases for Porter to push new proposal for features into CNAB Go or CNAB as well. It was kind of, I think Porter was the one really kind of testing the limits of what you can do with a bundle, I think.
Yeah, I can see like good intention. I can see also that we're like, should we put this somewhere else? But then it ends up like, because of how Porter has to mesh with that, like we end up like curating it to our own needs. But yeah.
And yeah, for all I know, we're still using Carolyn's fork of CNAB Go.
I was gonna say
Go mods.
I'm pretty sure like how we do stuff is also still like, there's like a lot of like housekeeping things I've come across where I'm like, oh, this is like still in Carolyn's repo and I need to fork this into like Porter because we have like a bunch of those. Or just, I don't know if y'all saw Troy and I like complaining, we were doing like dependency updates and I was just like, there's just like a random repo that we pull in for Mage files, and it's just like Mage files tools is over here in this repo I didn't even know about. And I was like, why is this over here? Put it over here.
I really don't like having to like have Porter native stuff in a generic Mage file repo such that, yeah, I can't just easily pull out a function because it's private or something like that. And yeah, like, I don't know. I've reverted. I just use make files.
Yeah.
So
Maybe I'm old
I was
school.
gonna. So I told Sarah yesterday.
It gets too
I was like,
complex. I
this-
get the idea of I'm
It
gonna
does.
stay and go, but yeah.
Yeah.
But I was telling Sarah yesterday, I was like, this is probably the thing that you need to do after you update the API to like generate the CRD again, should probably be in a make target. And because that's work that's necessary to make sure that you're not committing anything that doesn't have the CRD matching API version, it's probably something we should put in, because it comes, so when you do queue builder and it comes in a make file. We've deleted all that, which is fine. I think what happens is that now we're missing it. If we ever make updates to the API, we need to make sure that we do those things. So we probably should put that in a make Mage, whatever target, any target that will be able to sufficiently expect that when you're doing these CI builds and stuff like that. But yeah, I agree. I think I still have make files that I copy over to everything I do because it's the same thing, right?
The Porter Argo demo project that I sent a link to, I basically all the patterns from the Mage file work of it setting up the right tools in your environment and everything, so you don't have to worry about all those tool dependencies. Like, I just took all that and we rewrote it as a make file include that you can do, and it you know, I don't know, there's less files to go through to maintain it.
And half a line to code.
And
yeah, I was gonna say, because when you have to like go to definition to 3 different things, it makes it really difficult to track. So
yeah,
I'm for not so many layers. The more layers you have, the harder it is to diagnose, in my opinion.
I want to be able to do a PR that has all my make or Mage file capabilities in it. I don't, the idea of being dependent on another repo for that I have to get into a change, just because, like, to do the separate build of a Porter. So the gRPC work, I ended up putting in there so that it's a totally different binary that's built that has the server enabled, because it's a build flag to enable it. And it was not easy or obvious how to add that in, because there was stuff in a separate Mage file repo that only allowed you to build something called Porter. And I was building a Porter dash server binary.
How dare you?
So yeah, that PR ended up having a lot of copy and paste from the Mage file repo.
Yeah, we call dependency uplifts like the song and dance, because like you basically have to go over here, do this, and then like release it, and then do the over here. It is such an annoying thing. Like, I want to automate it for like everything I do, but it's hard to because it may not be. So Dependabot has the same issue, right? Like, they'll update sync, but then like it downgrades controller runtime. So then like I have PRs that are supposed to like fix all that. But, like, so it's but dependencies in Go are not as bad as other languages, but they've been through this. They've been through this time. So,
there's one last like issue that I want to see if we could figure out while we're here, even though the person did not show up, which doesn't surprise me. I think we're on a different time zone. I think I posted about it in maintainers. Someone was talking about, what was it? They wanted to use the template.docker file unchanged for their build. They made a pull request. Let's see if I can pull it up. Usually I'm more prepared, but today I didn't sit down at my computer until 1 minute before this meeting. So let's see if I can change it. I think, Stephen, you even read it too. And we both kind of went, we're not really sure if we should do this. And I wanted to at least try and update the issue. Also, by the way, ADO is working. We don't know why.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what the issue was around. I know I saw it basically. It seemed like they were trying to circumnavigate some of the Docker, the root Docker functionality that we put in place, which is crucial for like Iron Bank certification, and basically say disregard everything in Porter Docker and just use my Docker template as my root Docker file. And it's like, no, we want to use, we have the security stuff inside the Porter build stuff, and we need to just pull in your Docker template, not replace all of that Docker stuff with your Docker file, right? That was kind of my understanding of what they were asking.
Yeah, I like here's where I got confused is that I pulled up like my like generic like porter.yaml, and it says like, hey, uncomment this line if you want us to use the template.docker file that we generated and not mess with it. And that's like the vibe I got from this issue, was that like, hey, I want to use the template.docker file and not mess with it because I'm in like air gapped environments and I can't change things. So I'm gonna guess if you do change it, then you're pulling down different like Docker images, like things are gonna like be weird. So you just want to use the same thing that you already have on each thing. But yeah, I've been confused on like what we're trying to, and I guess there's code, so I could go look at that code to see like what exactly we're trying to bypass
So
here.
that was my feedback. If you want to create a Porter bundle and just use the Docker file template as the runtime for that bundle, I would say no, because that kind of breaks the thing that we say as a Porter bundle, you get these particular security features and functionality. It's non-root. It has these kinds of certifications associated with it, and you're wanting to create Porter bundles that are signed by Porter as an official bundle, but without the actual security and the entire stuff that we did around Iron Bank and all that.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So instead of using our invocation image, which takes care of all that shit, they're trying to pass on their own thing and not do
yeah. So the way it works now is we have the root image that is approved and certified, and then the Docker file template, we just copy over those lines into like a builder step. But that's not the root image that we run as the runtime. I think what they're asking is, let me just disregard all of your invocation image stuff and only use my image as the Porter bundle runtime. And I say no.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. If that's the case, that doesn't allow us to ensure that the security and layers. Yeah. Because it seems like they just want a command line flag to override that template.
Yeah, I think that's the wrong thing to do.
Looking at the PR, I see it now. Beforehand, I just thought they were trying to use a thing we were already doing. I was like, this is already a feature. What's your problem? But yeah, no, this makes sense.
Yeah, it's like, no, hey, I want to be able to run my Porter bundles as root. Like, well, that's kind of something we don't want, though.
Is this like a feature within Duffel? I haven't looked at Duffel, I just know it exists. But like, is this like something they could do within Duffel instead? Like I could point them over there.
No.
Duffel is just
I think Duffel's proof of concept more than anything else.
Yeah, it's just a reference implementation of CNAB stuff. I'm not aware of it being used.
There's no other kids on the block. We're the only kid on the block.
Hey, that's nice. And then they talk about this in like air-gapped environments, which I know we support. And I sent an article on how to do this in air-gapped environments. Have we heard? I haven't even seen an issue from people who use it saying that our stuff doesn't work in air-gapped environments. Is there any legacy knowledge on stuff not working in air-gapped environments?
No, I've heard the opposite. It's you create a tar of your bundle and then
we
send it by carrier pigeon.
We were actually doing that at F5 at one point, where we were, before we supported Artifactory as a bundle repository, we were tarring up the bundles and shipping them off to a generic Artifactory repo. So that essentially is air gap, right? Because we were tarring our bundles and then untarring our bundles, and that was just how we were storing them. So replace Artifactory with a flash drive.
Okay, I'm gonna respond to this issue and say basically like, hey, there's a reason we give you this base image. And it shouldn't be changed, and it's part of our functionality and making it a secure signed Porter bundle. And I'm trying to add more security, not less. I'll say it way more cool. Also, just so you know, on top of the 5 issues for the operator, who was it? Ralph has been talking about this like signing repository. This is the only time I wish Ralph was here. He was like, it's really easy. You just like drag and drop it into the operator. It's gonna be so easy. And I was like, this is gonna take me like 2 months. I guarantee it. But I'm gonna post more about that in the chat. Honestly, when I say like we're signing stuff for the operator, I mean we're signing stuff for Porter Main. And I think what we wanted to do was like add another layer of signing onto bundles.
So what do you mean signing stuff for the operator? Are you saying like signing the operator runtime? Because the operator doesn't build bundles, it just runs Porter bundles, right?
I think what he wants, this is my problem, I should have read. Let me pull up the blog. I haven't read this for like 4 months. I am just following this roadmap that was posted in January. I think we're supposed to be signing bundles.
Yes, yes to that.
Yes, okay. So he was like, for operator v1.0, we should be signing things. And I was like, okay, so what you mean is like for Porter Main, which is what we're calling Porter Main. But for Porter Main, we should add in the feature to sign bundles, and that will like translate into the operator. Like since the operator just deploys bundles, then there you go, just use your sign bundle to play it, everyone claps.
I mean,
it's the validating the signature. So that's where I could see some operator behaviors where at the installation time, we want to make sure we're validating the signature on the bundles before executing.
Okay.
And also, I mean, what do we need to sign from the operator, right? Do we want to sign our the actual images that we're building for the operator itself, right?
Oh. Yeah, that's a question. Do we want to sign the actual images for like the operator?
The
not
operator, not
the operator.
the entire, like just whatever we're running in Kubernetes, which we run as a deployment, right? That image that should probably be signed as well. Are we signing the main Porter?
I mean, we should. I'm assuming this is what people want.
We're signed. We need to be signing the binary, right? The binary needs to be signed. We need to sign the Docker containers that we build from main Porter, which are like the Porter agents. That comes from the Porter agent image comes from the main Porter. And that's what the operator uses for all of its installations, is that image. And then we also need to make sure that we're signing the operator code base as well. And anything we build from there, which I think it's just a Docker container, right? We just build the operator and then package it up and throw it up in the container, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Which is Brian more than I trust.
So those are things that we need to make sure are signed. And then we also need to make sure that when we do a Porter build, that we're signing the bundles from Porter build somehow, and that we're validating those. But I'm not sure, like, are we saying that the operator can't run unsigned bundles? Like what's the behavior of Porter bundle signing?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, this gets into this weird concept where it's like, do I care if a user chooses to run an unsigned bundle? Not really. Like, that's their call. I don't want to restrict them to that. But then, like, is there a case where, like, we're going to run into issues if Porter, everything else is signed, but then we're running an unsigned bundle? I don't think that's actually going to be an issue. No.
I don't think that's an issue. Yeah, because like you say, I mean, I think certain deployments, you're going to want to verify that your bundles are actually signed and whatnot, and maybe have it so that maybe there is an option to say, hey, don't allow unsigned bundles or something like that from an operation perspective. But at the end of the day, we do our due diligence to make sure everything porter related is signed so that people are confident where it's coming from, and we make sure that we're verifying things that are signed. You know?
Yeah, I think that at least having the option to warn on unsigned or fail on unsigned, right? Where Porter can identify when a bundle is signed or not, and then they can decide what kind of action they want to take when it comes to running an unsigned bundle.
Yeah, I could see that being in like the porter configure,
Yeah,
porter
exactly.
config option.
Yep.
Yeah, it like a disallow unsigned. There you
Yeah.
go. And then like, you know, people in production clap. But I think Stephen, you did a great job of identifying 3 different layers of signing that was like really helpful to me, which was like 1, our binaries, both like whatever we're like kind of distributing on GitHub need to be signed. Cool. And then 2, our Docker containers and then images. And then 3, like the actual options of like signing and unsigning bundles itself. So that's like 3 whole layers of signing that we need to accomplish. And you think like 1, I don't know, I've never done this, but I see a lot of people do it. I feel like it shouldn't be that hard to just sign our binaries. I don't know, it might be like a GitHub action and releases or.
No, you know, once you got your certs and everything sorted out, then usually the hardest part for me is always getting the certs sorted out. Get some trusted certs to do it all with.
I didn't think.
Yeah, but that's the other thing is from a Porter signing.
Everything else is just use those certs.
Would we, if we did signed bundles, we would be signing the bundles that Porter built with a Porter maintained cert that's built into the binary? Is that right? Like, how would we even do bundle signing? And then validate that bundles are signed? I'm not super familiar with that whole ecosystem, to be honest.
I'm gonna ask Ralph for the thing. He sent me like a thing that does like half of this that he wanted me to use. But when you ask about signing bundles, my knowledge falls back on how we did cert implementation on console. And it was a lot of like BYOC, like bring your own cert, that kind of stuff. We let you deal with it and we'll handle the signing behavior. And so like we can have, and console had this as well, like an optional like console cert you could do, like just like here's your generic one. But like you have to like specify that you're using that. Like you have to know about certs a little bit where it is and then just run the command. And I think that's how we should do it here too. Like BYOC will give you like a Porter generic one that we use. And like you can use it, but like most people should roll their own.
Well, from a bundle perspective, even providing one, like I don't think we want to be signing bundles for folks saying it's a Porter signed bundle.
I see what you're saying.
Based on, you know, they could put whatever malicious code they want to in a bundle. You bet I don't want to put my cert on that, right?
Yeah. No, I can see that. The whole thing in console,
you can go in and null out all the non-root support, right?
Right.
If you wanted to. And so I think it's bring your own, and we don't provide one for you. It's off the top of my head.
Yeah, I think like the easiest thing is just like if I want people to sign, we'll have like a good doc on like how to use like the SSL search command. There you go, cool. You're done. Yeah, I'm fine with that. So we'll
provide a good user experience for doing a self-signed, and there you go. That makes sense.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. I might create like an epic of issues on this, like signing and like signing bundles, and then it'll have like, hey, here's our like our 3 layers that we have to walk through just so that this knowledge isn't lost. And then Troy, do you have any takeaways? I'm calling you before I wrap up. Or things you want to.
I was trying to find a mute button. No, I think I have a path forward. I was trying to see like in Porter how the outputs get done, because that would be, and while we're looking the demo that you did, like how do we get the outputs from the last installation and the last stuff, right? And then see if there's a way that we can do this dynamically and with what we discussed today. And hopefully if I can get something, it's probably not gonna be this weekend, maybe next week, at least a little bit further than we are today. I could hopefully discuss it in the Porter maintainer channel and see how far I cut with what is needed. And if I have any questions, I could just drop them in that channel.
Yeah, I would encourage you and Brian to work together as much as Brian has bandwidth, mainly because like the gRPC, all this stuff is like the XF5 brain like making. So as much as like we can get knowledge wise from you two, I'd really appreciate it, but I know you're both busy. And then, just see how we can move this forward. And then, yeah, I will be posting a lot of questions as I like slowly break the operator, trying to learn how it works. So cool. Awesome. I will see you all in 2 weeks. Thanks so much for coming out.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
All right, talk to you later.